And when we talk about three views of hell, the first view I'm listing is the fire that torments forever. This is the traditional majority view. Majority because almost everybody in the Christian world believes it. Traditional because it's been the view for all the years, at least since Augustine, for most people. But it raises a question that troubles many people. And that question is, what must we conclude from Scripture that God, who gave His Son for sinners, will keep billions of them alive forever for the purpose of tormenting them without end? If that's what Scripture says, our answer must be yes. We don't have the option of changing that. And yet there are many scholars today, some of the most highly respected in the world among evangelicals as well as other people, who are saying, no, that's not what the Bible really says. The traditional view looks for such scriptures as eternal fire of eternal punishment and the fire that is not quenched. And they say this is what these passages mean. Some of the scholars who have said, no, that's not what we have to believe based on Scripture, include F.F. Bruce, who was probably the best-known Bible commentator of the 20th century, John Stott, who recently passed on to glory, Michael Green, who wrote Evangelism in the New Testament, E. Earl Ellis, who taught for several years at Southwestern Baptist Seminary, Fort Worth, Philip E. Hughes, a Reformed man who taught at a couple of American seminaries, Tom Albright, who is with us here this evening. And by the way, he is the first acknowledgement in the fire that consumes, because many years ago when I first finished graduate school, I wrote and asked him what are some subjects that need further study. And he mentioned, among others, I think it would be interesting, he said, since the word Gehenna appears only in the Gospels, to see how the rest of the New Testament talks about the end of the wicked. And eventually that's something I looked at, though it didn't bear fruit for several years in my own study. John McRae from Wheaton Graduate School, his son Rob is here tonight with his wife Judy, and we're glad to have them. John Stackhouse at Regent College, who took the place of J.I. Packer upon his retirement there fairly recently. Dale Moody, who taught at Southern Seminary in Louisville for about 40 years. John FRANKE in Pittsburgh. Homer HAILEY, a Church of Christ scholar, well respected. Tom Robinson from New York, who is with us today, and taught at Union Seminary, as guest taught at Harvard and Princeton and Abilene Christian and Pepperdine. Clark Pinnock, who was a personal friend and passed to glory earlier this year. From Canada, John Wenham, an evangelical man in Oxford, England, who was highly respected by Bible-believing Christians in England. Richard BAUCKHAM at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, now at Cambridge, and who wrote the foreword to the third edition of The Fire That Consumes. And N.T. Wright, who some people say has written more books than he's read. That, of course, is a nasty rumor. Besides the traditional view, which all of these scholars, among others, say is not necessarily what we have to say the Bible teaches, two other explanations have also been offered. In addition to the fire that torments forever, there's the fire that purifies and eventually restores people to God. This is what's called universal restoration, or the Greek term for it that's commonly used is apokatastasis. This is the view that Rob Bell in his book proposes by asking provocative questions, though he doesn't really argue for the view in any detail. Someone asked me recently, did you write your third edition in response to Rob Bell? I said, actually not. The first edition of my book came out when Rob Bell was in the third grade. Then there's in addition to the fire that purifies, which looks at passages such as God is not willing that any should perish, and that He reconciled the world to Himself. There's the third view, which I'm going to say tonight is the most biblically consistent view of all three, the fire that consumes, which is the title of my book. This looks at passages such as God is a consuming fire from Deuteronomy and from Hebrews. The wages of sin is death, and if that really means what it sounds like. God destroys both soul and body in hell, and that's the view that I'm presenting this evening.